salutations, I'm Dexter from Research District, and in this episode we will be discussing the federal government actions against human trafficking. To limit the scope of this topic, we will be focusing in on their actions within the United States, not their international actions. We might circle back to the U.S. funded, as Psaki likes to say, international dealings, which is mostly about foreign aid and diplomacy, and not pertinent to trafficking within the U.S. But our concern for now is American victims and traffickers. And since I believe that neither you nor I would survive a several hour-long video, this is the first video in a planned 4-episode miniseries. In 2000, Congress passed the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, TVPA. Prior to that, people could be charged under the Mann Act of 1910. The TVPA started the modern era of combating human trafficking. It created the Office to Monitor and Combat Trafficking Persons, and also the Presidential Interagency Task Force to Monitor and Combat Trafficking. More on those later. But it also originated the 3 P's of actions against human trafficking. The first P is for protection of victims, which includes federal benefits, and for foreign national special immigration status. The second P is for prosecution of traffickers. And the final P is prevention on both the international level through diplomacy and domestically, which focuses on training and awareness. The TVPA was expanded in 2003, 2005, 2008, 2013, and in 2017. In addition to the TVPA was the Justice for Victims of Trafficking Act of 2015, which focuses on victims under 18. One expansion that is troubling is eliminating the requirement to prove that the defendant knew a sex trafficking victim was a minor. There is no one agency that is solely responsible for the government's human trafficking efforts. The closest is the Presidential Interagency Task Force to Monitor and Combat Human Trafficking in Persons. It is composed of the Department of State, which heads the task force and is also responsible for the Office to Monitor and Combat Trafficking Persons, the Department of Treasury, Defense, Justice, the Interior, Agricultural, Commerce, Labor, Health and Human Services, Education, and Homeland Security, as well as the Office of Management and Budget, the Office of the U.S. Trade Representatives, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, the NSC, and the DPC, the Agency for International Development, USAID, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the U.S. Equal Opportunity Employment Commission. Each of these members have their own section of human trafficking, which adds to the confusion in finding information on the U.S. government's actions on trafficking. The Presidential Interagency Task Force to Monitor and Combat Trafficking Persons produces an annual report on the U.S. government's efforts to combat trafficking in persons. Kind of redundant there, sorry guys. The last report was published in October of 2020 and is 32 pages long with pictures. It gave an overview of the governmental response. The latest report, unlike the prior two, was focused on the various agencies' responses to COVID-19 and how they adapted. But it does give the 10 strategic objectives of the government. The first objective is to investigate and prosecute traffickers and dismantle the criminal networks that perpetuate trafficking in persons. The next is to enhance victim identification and the provision of relief and services for all victims of trafficking. The third is enhanced training of stakeholders, including civil society, law enforcement, and government officials, to increase the identification of victims. The fourth is to encourage foreign governments to combat trafficking through international diplomacy and engagement. Fifth, forge and strengthen partnerships and other forms of collaboration to combat trafficking in persons. The sixth objective is to fund domestic and international anti-trafficking programs focusing on prosecution, protection, and prevention. The seventh is to integrate anti-trafficking components into relevant government programs. Number 8 is promote public awareness about modern slavery. Ninth is to spur innovation and improve capacity to combat modern slavery through data collection and research. And finally, hanging out at number 10, gather and synthesize actionable intelligence to increase the number of domestic and international trafficking prosecutions. As mentioned earlier, the State Department's Office to Monitor and Combat Trafficking Persons produces the Trafficking in Persons Report, which was last produced in June of 2021 and is nearly 650 pages long. Most of this tome is composed of individual countries' status on human trafficking enforcement. If you are planning to go out on the country trip, you might want to read through your destination's narrative just as a heads up, or for fun, or as a warning, whichever. Strip clubs and exotic dancing are mentioned in the report, but only in relation to the following countries: Bahrain, Dominican Republic, Germany, Greece, and St. Lucia. And since I had to look it up, St. Lucia is an island nation in the Eastern Caribbean. It's best known for offshore banking and tourism. It has a population of around 180,000 back in 2018. One amazing report is the Attorney General's annual report to Congress and assessment of U.S. government activities to combat trafficking in persons. But unfortunately, the last annual report was from 2015. It reads as if the Presidential Interagency's Task Force to Monitor and Combat Trafficking in Persons report is a Cliff Notes version of the AG's report. These three reports have formed the starting point of attempting to understand the U.S. government's actions against human trafficking. I have sent an email to the Office to Monitor and Combat Trafficking in Persons requesting when or if there will be an updated reports from the AG and the Presidential Task Force. There are a couple more people and groups that are also involved in the federal response to trafficking. The first is the U.S. Advisory Council on Human Trafficking, which is an official council that provides information from the human trafficking survivor point of view. They also provide an annual report, linked below, on the victims and relief efforts. We will cover more on this group in a later episode. Another group is the Senior Policy Operating Group, SPOG, which is made up of various senior officials that seem to make sure that all the agencies are on the same page throughout the federal system, meaning that everyone is using the same definitions, that agencies don't contradict each other in their statements and publications. In short, this group ensures that the federal government presents a united front. The final position I will cover on this episode is the White House Czar on Human Trafficking, who is a member of the Domestic Policy Council. They are formerly Heather Fisher, who was appointed under former President Trump, who created the position. I was unable to find who is currently holding that position, or if the position even exists under the Biden administration. We will get more into the definitions in the next episode, but for now, I want to bring up the three terms that are used interchangeably, and they are trafficking in persons, human trafficking, and modern slavery. The first two I have no issues with, but the modern slavery term seems to be a bit hyperbolic. Besides the historical connotations, it implies that human trafficking is systemically involved, but for the majority of the world, and in particular the West, it is outlawed and systemically punished. It also delegitimizes actual slavery, which is systemically endorsed in several countries such as Libya, Somalia, and Yemen. In our next episode on human trafficking, we will continue on with investigating federal government's efforts against human trafficking. But we will be focusing on one of the P's, prosecutions of human trafficking crimes. With the following two episodes being on protection of the victims, and then the last P, prevention efforts. Like, give a thumbs up, comment, subscribe, and so on and so on and so on. And with that, goodbye.